Hello, hello, my friends, and welcome back to Slowpreneur. I'm your host, Stephanie Pellet, and this, of course, is the show where we explore how to have an intentional, sustainable, beautiful, pleasurable business without the busy. On today's episode, I am bringing you an interview with Joy Asibey-Gabriel, who is an incredible feminine adornment coach and personal stylist, an all around really inspiring human being who uses a pleasure first principle in everything that she does, whether that's her work, her family life, her everyday life, her business. Everything starts with pleasure for her. And I find that to be such a fascinating and incredible concept that you don't hear talked about very much, right? That's not a very common or typical or popular way to approach life, but I think it is a really profound idea. So, in this episode, Joy and I are discussing why pleasure can be so hard to come by, why we resist it, why we have negative connotations associated with pleasure, why we tend to think that pleasure is for somebody else but not for us. We're going to tackle all of that, and we're also going to talk about ways that we can bring pleasure into our lives and businesses in more accessible, easy, tangible ways that don't feel like they are far away belonging to someone else with a different life than ours. Pleasure is accessible to all of us all the time. Joy is going to prove that to you in this episode, and I hope you really enjoy it. I loved talking to Joy about this and kind of digging into the idea of pleasure. I ran into so many concepts I didn't even realize I was holding on to. And so I just think this is a really rich and juicy discussion. I hope you feel the same way. So without further ado, let's dive into my interview with Joy Asibey-Gabriel. Hi, Joy. Welcome to Slowpreneur.
Hey, good to see you.
It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. We were talking a little bit before the recording, and I was saying that I cannot think of someone better to teach us about how to bring pleasure into business. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful that you are here with us today. So, thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so to get us started, for those who are not familiar with you, can you tell us a bit about your brand, Black Lady of Leisure, and what you do? And my caveat is always, this is not an elevator pitch. You can
Oh,
take
yeah.
your time and enjoy it. So tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I'm a feminine adornment coach. I like to
Mm.
say, like, AKA a personal stylist. If someone's like, "What is a feminine adornment coach?" But to me, it's about more than just the clothes. So it's about how the clothes make you feel. And so
Mhm.
I feel like my job is to help a woman who might be struggling with getting dressed. She's not feeling very confident about her style, really helping her to express who she is from the inside, bringing it outwards through her clothes so that she feels confident, so that she feels lit up and ready to share herself or her message or her voice with the world.
Mm, that's really cool. I love that. And we did a workshop together in the Profoundry because this is a concept I think so many business owners struggle with. You know, we're all familiar with the trope of the business owner at home in their pajamas, working from the computer. The pandemic really did us dirty on that
Mhm.
one. And I think it has so much power, this idea that the way that we show up can be so impacted by the way that we dress, adorn ourselves,
Yeah,
take care of ourselves more
yeah,
generally. So I think it's just like a really powerful concept, and I know the community was really into it when when you taught us. But I'm also very curious, like how you got to this, because I know you've done so many different things over the years,
mhm.
but I think they all kind of had a common thread. I know you did sort of embodied movement at one point. So yeah, just like tell us a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah. So true. Like sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I was doing all these different things, but all the threads
Mm,
really have come together
totally.
and woven into this pretty awesome like thing that I get to do now. So I started my career working in brand communications, and I used to work
Okay.
in London, and so I worked with a lot of big brands, helping them to, you know, express who they are,
Hmm.
and share their message or their product or their experience with a bigger audience. And I always say to people that even though I wasn't directly styling, I was doing a lot of behind the scenes. Um, it's the same process. It's like figuring out
Mm,
who is this brand, or what do they want to communicate? And then how do we do it? And I think that's kind of like the same thing I'm doing with women. It's like, who are you? And then how do we bring that out through your clothes? So that's where I started. And then I left that because it was a wild and crazy world and it just didn't feel aligned to who I was anymore. And I kind of went on this journey to figure out what I wanted to do.
Mm.
And yeah, like you said, it took me to doing some embodiment work, which I've actually started bringing back into my practice.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, with a work called S Factor, a movement experience, movement
Mm.
practice for women. Um, what else have I done? I've done a lot of personal development and growth. I've been in a lot of communities of women really experiencing what it's like to be in sisterhood, um, learning the art of pleasure, learning about my womanhood and my femininity and my sensuality. And all of that has been influenced or influences the work I do today. Um, and then I think just taking my love of travel, I've lived in lots of different places. So yeah, there's like lots of different threads that come into this work.
Yeah. And then you landed on the adornment, which I think is such a beautiful sort of tangible representation of the things that you have done all this time, right? It's like you did it with branding, but now you're doing it with individual people and teaching them how to show their values and show their personality um, through their clothes and through their adornment, which I think is really neat. But I also think like the thing that really sets you apart, and you've already mentioned it a couple times in like just a few short minutes, um, is the fact that you always start with pleasure. I mean, you literally have that phrase in all of your work on your website that it's a pleasure first practice.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the like phrase pleasure first is not one that I have really ever heard before, before you. Um, pleasure first. What a novel concept, because I really don't think that almost anything in our world tends to exist as
Mm,
pleasure first. That's not what's encouraged typically, right? We don't
right.
typically say like pick your job based on like pleasure first, or pick, it's not this forefront value that our culture tends to share. And so I just I just love it. I want you to tell us more about it. What does it mean to you? And kind of how do you apply it to your work? Because it really does, it goes beyond just what is a person's personality. It's like
Yeah.
what brings them pleasure and joy and life. And that's so different, I think, than even other stylists that I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you say that it's not something that we, are used to hearing or used to
Yeah.
putting as like an important value first, because I think that was my experience, which is why it's so important to
Mm,
me now. Like it really came out of years of not putting pleasure first, but putting other things like success and working really hard and, showing up in the ways that probably people expected me to. And I'm thinking specifically at work, but then also when I became a mother and just like constantly like, oh,
mm,
this doesn't feel very enjoyable, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to do
mm,
this. And so it was when I started studying, you know, the importance of pleasure and working with a mentor and realizing like, wow, this is life changing. This is beyond just uh, enjoyment. This is powerful. This is powerful stuff.
mm,
Like that was, I'd say, this practice has changed my life, and it's
mm,
changed who I am. It changes how I relate to people. And so when I started working as a feminine adornment coach or as a stylist, I was like, no, this has to come first, because what we like and how it makes us feel, and then in turn feeling good, it's kind of like, to me, it's like the stuff of life. Like this is what we're
yeah.
here for. It's like to experience, to light up our senses, to like find ways to feel good, to vibrate in this like juicy energy. And I think clothes has the opportunity to bring that. Like this is a fun, enjoyable, pleasure inducing process. So yeah, pleasure first.
I just love it. I love pleasure first because it just points to me the difference between you could have someone who's dressed like
Hmm.
to the nines. I mean, to the tens even, like looking incredible, all the accessories on point, but sometimes you can kind of tell when there's like no joy there, or
Yeah.
if it's just like checking boxes and
Yeah.
it's not something that that person really connects with. Or I can imagine like a piece of clothing that just like doesn't really fit you there that well, and so it actually is constricting, or it's rubbing you in like on your back and it's itchy, and so none of those are pleasure first. They might look good, but they don't necessarily feel good. And I think
Yeah.
it's really cool to see you make that distinction, because I think anyone could wear an outfit that they see in the pages of a magazine. Like, you can go to the store, you can get that outfit,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's actually going to make you feel the way that you're hoping to feel. And like, the way we dress is typically because we are hoping to feel a certain way, wouldn't you
Certain
say?
way. Yeah. And I would even add, like, when you think of the reverse, like imagine someone who's dressed in a way that might not fit the magazine and it might not be
Mm,
perfect, but you can see that they feel really good. Like they feel
mm,
genuinely confident and they love what they're wearing and they're not questioning like, oh, does this go with this? And they're comfortable in their own skin. Like to me, that energy, if I just like picture that person in my mind, that's kind
mm-hmm,
of the energy I want to be around. To me, that's true magnetism. And I think that comes
mm.
that sense of like, I like this, it makes me feel good, and it radiates out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it radiates out in a way that I think helps us be more impactful in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably what I find the most powerful about your work. You're not just doing this for the pretty picture on the Instagram. This is also about being more effective in our lives. I know for me, when I take the time to do my hair or get dressed up a bit, I just feel like such a different person than when
Hmm.
I just, roll out of bed and I want to put on a sweatshirt, no shade to sweatshirts, but like,
Yeah.
you just don't feel as effective. And I know for a lot of people listening who are business owners, we've already touched on this, but I think it can be hard to prioritize getting dressed in a way that feels pleasurable, even though I think we all kind of know in the back of our minds that it would probably make us feel more powerful or energized or whatever it is that we're hoping. So do you ever run into like resistance from client? I mean, I'm guessing like people who hire you want help, but
Yeah.
resistance from people who are like, I just want to dress for comfort, or my life doesn't allow me to like wear bright colors, or why
Mm.
should I? What's your pitch for someone who's sort of like still on the fence, even though I think they're probably getting convinced by this point?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's so funny. I was literally just talking about this yesterday, and I was
Mm,
saying to the group of women in the Peacock Club, it's not if you encounter resistance, it's when, because I think
mm,
we naturally tend to resist pleasure, like feeling good. We find lots of different ways to avoid it. Whether that's like, we're settling, we're playing smaller, it's not for me, it's for somebody else. I can't
mm,
afford it. Like there's so many reasons why we push things away. And so, yeah, I do see the resistance. I find the people who are ready to work with me have opened themselves up enough that they are just like, let's do this. And I think the process is fun enough because I think pleasure equals fun as well. It's fun
mm.
enough that they're willing to try and explore and kind of take the journey with me. But when someone isn't ready, yeah, I hear I hear all the things I just listed. Like I can't afford this, which I understand that part, or I don't have time because a lot of people think it's very time intensive, or this isn't for me. This is for someone who
Mhm,
is living a different kind of life.
mhm.
And I don't really push people. I think you have to be ready. I think you have
Yeah.
to know that you're at the stage where it's important enough to address it.
Mhm. Okay, I need to dig into that a little bit more, because what you just said is so true. Why do we resist pleasure? What
Yeah.
is your theory? Is
Ooh,
it just the thing about our culture doesn't like value it? Like,
yeah.
what is it? Because I see it in myself. Like, I think Glennon Doyle talks about how sometimes she's felt like just like a floating brain,
Right.
where it's literally just like she lives her whole life, her whole world, just like in her brain, thinking, writing, reading, communicating. But it's like her brain is like severed from her body
Yeah.
practically, because you're just kind of detached, like that her body, she
Yeah.
said before, has like not been like as relevant to her experience because she's such a sort of thinker person. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's something I can really relate to. Like I find it in myself. I sometimes struggle to prioritize things that I know would be pleasurable. So anyway,
Enjoyable.
what is your theory? You've worked with enough people at this point.
Yeah. Ooh, do I have
Why do we
a
do this?
theory? I don't know if I have a theory. I think that it's like you said, I think it's something we're used to. I think we're
Mm,
used to pushing through. Maybe it's that we're used to pushing through how we feel. So like you say, it's easy to cut
mm,
off from like our body has so much to say. If you start tapping into what
yes.
your body has to say, that's actually kind of a big ocean to swim in. And I think a lot of us um, maybe aren't ready to go swimming in the ocean
Mm,
in that kind of water because it's deep, right? And it can be deep in like dark ways, and it can be deep in really big, expansive, radiant, like soul fulfilling ways. And
yeah.
both ends of that are kind of scary. I think pleasure is like
Mm,
a portal into like feeling, right? Essentially, because I don't think pleasure is always just a positive thing. I think it's positive. I don't think it's the stereotypical happy versus
mm,
sad. I think you can find sadness pleasurable. I think you can find anger pleasurable. I think you can find pleasure in everything. And when you get to
mm,
that point, it's aliveness. And I think
yeah.
we're constantly doing things every day to turn off our aliveness because, whoa, to feel all those things, it's a lot.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I can just feel the truth of that. We're spending so much time like running and moving and striving, and a lot of that does rely on us turning off things like biological needs. I mean, how many times have
Yeah.
I heard someone say, I am sitting at my computer and then all of a sudden I realize I need to sprint to the bathroom because I've just been like pretending that's not a thing, or I'm really thirsty, or I actually kind of had a headache and
Mhm.
like I should have taken an Advil 20 minutes ago. And I think it's because the ways that we need to perform often require us to like dim our bodily needs or our, even community or connection needs. And I think a lot of us right now are in this process of how do we reclaim that? How do we reconnect, like reintegrate those parts of ourselves so that we don't, buy into these frameworks that require us to release our humanity. And I think it's just really cool to hear you say that like pleasure is a door, like a way into that way of being that can feel um, actually accessible or actually fun, because you can access pleasure in such small ways,
Oh yeah.
tiny little ways,
Yeah.
tiny little ways.
Tiny little ways. It's funny, like as you're talking, we can come back to the tiny little ways, but I'm just thinking about that Marianne Williamson poem, which keeps coming back to
Mm,
me more and more lately, which is, oh God, I wish I could recite it properly. But it's that idea that what we're afraid of is how like big and brilliant we can be. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like I need to like splice it in.
Well, we'll slice it in. Our biggest fear is
Yes.
not that we are
Adequate,
inadequate. It is that we are
powerful beyond measure.
powerful beyond measure.
Yes.
We did it. Tag
Yes.
team.
And yeah, and I think pleasure is like an opportunity to kind of tap into that, right? Like ultimately when we feel good, we're feeling like the fullness of who we are, right? If we
Hmm.
if we imagine that like the energy that's running this entire show is like a loving, blissful, orgasmic vibe. And so every time we experience a little bit of pleasure, I think we're plugging into that. But that's like
Mm,
big, big energy. So
yeah. I think the other thing that you said just a couple minutes ago that is so true is the piece about how people often think like it's for somebody else.
yeah,
Like, because I do think that for better or for worse, pleasure has almost become associated with different kinds of like personality types, right? You have the person who's just like so sensual and everything they do is just like biting into this juicy peach, and you're kind of like, that person's kind of a hippie. Like, I don't know if I'm that person,
right,
right? Fine.
yeah,
But I think it's like what I love about your work and like just finding people who um, work this into their lives in ways that feel more accessible to me,
Mhm.
right? Like I might not be like living on a beach, somewhere eating peaches only. But I can look at the way that, you get dressed in the morning
Yeah.
and you always have, beautiful jewelry, beautiful, colorful clothing. Your home is really decorated. And all of those things are like accessible and tangible to me in my own life.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wonder if there is, to some extent, we cut ourselves off because we think like we're not the kind of people
Yeah.
that like pleasure has typically been associated with. There's like a stigma around pleasure, and the people that really are motivated by pleasure, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, this is why like Black Lady of Leisure became my well, first of all, she's my muse. And then I decided to
Yeah.
name my whole company after my muse because I also was like, wow, look at this woman that I could see in my mind. She's in pleasure. She's in repose. She's living this life that feels very leisurely and
Yes.
luxurious. And I can't necessarily see that for myself. Like, I have things
Mm.
to do and kids to take care of, but there was something for me to learn from her and still is. Like, I find it's a continuous learning. So even I
Yeah.
recognize that, like, oh, that's for those people who live that life, who have these kinds of opportunities, not me. But what I've learned is first of all, that's not true.
Yeah.
And I also think pleasure can be associated with laziness, which is a big
Yes.
no-no in our culture, right? Like to be lazy is uh, is not is not valued. It's not an
Right.
ideal. Uh, and so I guess there's a little bit of stigma around it. So there's an opportunity to turn it around and see like how you bringing it in small ways can be useful.
That's such a good point about pleasure being associated with laziness, because I think we're starting to like untie some of these threads around how like pleasure sometimes almost feels like the antithesis of productivity. Like those two are almost in our minds. I
Yeah.
want you to debunk this, but like they have been set up as equal and opposite reactions. Like if we're prioritizing pleasure, we're not prioritizing productivity,
Mhm.
but we've been taught we got to prioritize productivity. That's the main thing. That's what we're here to do, right? Like in this capitalist kind of society, that is what we're here to do. And so yeah, I like this like unpicking of these threads of like why laziness and rest and repose, you said the word repose, can feel so like indulgent, and
That was the word I was going to use too.
yeah, something that's only allowed for like royalty, like people who like don't have to worry about anything. And so yeah, I love this idea that it's almost like a radical act
Yeah.
to prioritize pleasure. It reminds me of Trisha Hersey's work from the Nap Ministry, and how
Oh yeah.
it's so important to like rest, and that
Yeah.
rest can be this radical act,
Yeah.
because it goes like flying in the face of all the things that we've been taught.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly that. Even the idea, I was going to use the word indulgent, and then the other word that came to me was frivolous. The idea that's like
Mm,
this is ridiculous. And I have a story around like my nails. So I always thought I was someone who didn't have nice nails, and then I also probably without really realizing it, but associated people with nice nails to people who had like the time to spend getting their nails
mm,
done. And again, that idea of like that's for those people. And then I had a girlfriend who told me about her nail technician and what she does and the techniques they use. And I went and had that done and then realized like I too can have nice nails. And this was like in the beginning, I was like a little bit like embarrassed about it because I thought it was a really frivolous thing, but it brings me so
mm.
much joy and pleasure. Um, so again, it's like being able to embrace what we want and embrace our desires. And actually that's something that I work with my clients on. It's like own own your desire no matter how
Mhm.
outrageous it might seem, no matter how frivolous someone else might judge it to be. Like if you want it, there's a reason. It's important. And I even like to say that it's like the interface between you and that which is greater than you. Like
Mm,
there's it's relevant.
there's a spiritual level there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, as we're talking, it's kind of making me think of this beautiful idea to like lean into places where you have that kind of emotional reaction. Like the words lazy and indulgent and frivolous are so loaded, and they're also like at least like frivolous is like very gendered word as well, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just like this idea of like if you're noticing a reaction come up in you of like someone else doing something, like even when I said the hippie example, what the heck is wrong with like eating a peach on the beach? Like nothing.
Yeah.
It's not even that hippie. Like I was kind of grasping for an example, but
Yeah.
you hear my point. It's sort of like, why are we labeling these things, and
Yeah.
where do we have that emotional reaction? Because maybe that's actually somewhere we need to like dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
The things that we think are frivolous and silly, or little fripperies that people have in their lives, perhaps that's actually pointing us to somewhere where we have some emotion around that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Even I was saying this again to my group the other day. I was talking about envy and jealousy, and when you
Mm.
hear a woman, specifically woman to woman, because I think in patriarchal society we've kind of been raised to, not kind of, we have been raised to compete against each other and almost to feel
Yeah,
like what you have means that I can't have it. And one of
yeah,
the things I've learned is watching a woman who is fully in her pleasure and celebrating that, first of all, is also a little radical, because we're used to going
yes,
like, oh, I have to dim this down and play it down and let me accept the compliment by saying like, what, this, no. And when you're able to really just like stand in it, first of all, to witness that is can be incredibly powerful if you can
hmm,
embrace that she can take you higher by being her fullest, most glorious self. And then when you do feel any sense of envy or jealousy, realizing, like a little bit like what you've just said, like there might be a desire in there. It might be
yeah,
like this woman who has, let's say, like I'm going to use a frivolous example, like incredible
sure,
blowout. She's got gorgeous hair.
uh-huh,
And you might look at her and go like, damn, I wish I had hair like that. And then, maybe it's on Instagram and you head down that rabbit hole of like self doubt and inner critic or shame or whatever because you don't have what she has. But if you can reframe it and go, oh, actually, maybe there's a little part of me that also wants that. And
hmm,
it might not even be jealousy or envy. It could also be like, oh, look at this girl with her
judgment, yeah,
judgment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that those are like little clues for us, right? Little breadcrumbs, because, there has to be a permission giving. First of all, we have to accept that we are actually not floating brains. We are full bodies connected to our brains. And, I think we've seen this. We're getting older. We're seeing that like our bodies can't just exist separate from our brains anymore. We're starting to have like aches and pains, or health issues, or whatever we might be struggling with. And I think that those are usually signs of the body starting to speak louder and louder, like you have been trying to exist in this way for so long,
Mm-hmm.
that is like it worked when you were 21 or 22, and now it's not working so well. And so I think as we try to reintegrate, it's just so important to like not not shy away from pleasure, not shy away from rest, not shy away from the things that we've been sort of conditioned to believe are not as important as being productive. But yeah, let's go back to the little things, because I think that's a good place for people to start. Like if you had someone who's, I'm going to just create an avatar in my mind. They're a lawyer.
Yeah.
um, they are really used to overachieving and going and not taking care of their bodies, although they might like work out on the treadmill every morning at 5:45 a.m. because like of course you have to do that. um, but like how does somebody start to introduce pleasure in like accessible ways that feel possible given their existing habits or lifestyle? You don't have to have all the answers. I'm just looking for your what kind of comes to mind.
Um, so I love this idea of being a pleasure researcher, which is a term that I learned
Ooh.
from Mama Gina. I can't claim it for myself. Mama Gina to me is like the empress of pleasure, and this is
Yeah.
who I learned from. And so yeah, she has this concept of pleasure researching, which is like put on your like I'm a pleasure hunter, researcher,
Mm.
experimenter hat and go out into the world and discover, explore what lights you up. So I think it's going to be different for everyone. Um, just like, some people really love, uh, you know, kinky things and other people don't get any pleasure from that. I was going to use actually, this is totally off on a tangent, but I was going to use the example of BDSM as an example of where people can take pleasure from something that someone else finds painful.
Yeah.
So So there is really no specific container to it, but I'd say, yeah, what lights up your senses? So really starting with the basics, like we come back into the body. The body has these incredible sense of sight and sound and touch and taste. And again, back to this idea of aliveness, like it's all here to serve our aliveness. Like what would life be like if you couldn't smell, or you couldn't
Right.
taste your food, or you couldn't feel things against your skin, or you couldn't, as some people experience, you can't see. Um, so I think we can go back to the basics. And when I'm working with someone with their clothes, I start there. I say, like, what lights you up? Is it bright colors? Is it, the feeling of, say, cashmere against your skin? Is it a really
Mhm.
tight leather skirt because you like that sense of constriction against your skin? Or is it flowing and spaciousness and
Mhm.
volume?
Mhm.
So it's putting on the researcher hat and going out and seeing. But some of the easy things I do, dance. Dance is a big
Mm.
one. I start every morning with dancing. I think that's like an instant hit of aliveness. It reawakens us. It literally gets like blood and things moving. And it feels really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this idea of like starting with the senses. I
Yeah.
feel like that's just such a simple, tangible thing that we can do. It's like we all know what our five senses are. Like we can all find ways. I actually just read Gretchen Rubin's new book, Life in Five Senses, where she really describes her journey to like reconnect to her senses. And I
Mm,
wouldn't say she's necessarily coming at it from the pleasure angle per se, although there's definitely some of that in there. But I just found it a really interesting topic because it is so simple, but it
mm,
is so profound also. Like if you want to work on your sense of smell. I put on perfume today. I don't do that every
mm.
single day,
Yeah.
but I did. I knew I was talking to you, so
Yeah.
I had to put on something. So it's like I can smell that right now,
Yeah.
and that is affecting my experience. I would say it's like a pleasurable experience. And so I think even in those micro moments, like
Mhm.
looking at something beautiful or touching something beautiful and really trying to touch it, um, it's hard when you're not used to it. But I think if we think that we have to go from zero to having these really elaborate like pleasure routines and spending like 4 hours in the bath and like like it can feel like that's
Yeah.
not on that's not on my level right now.
Yeah.
But I love this idea of like a cup of tea or like a certain lotion that you really like, and starting to like reintegrate in that way. It's
Yeah.
really
Or
really
like
cool.
I'm looking at, I have flowers. I love looking at
Yeah.
flowers. So I buy flowers every week. Or
Yeah.
sometimes, I was sitting here with you and I was like just rubbing my hand up and down my arm. And
Mm,
it's just like that sense of, I'm very sensory, but like just feeling that sense of touch, like it's literally right here. So like you say, we
yeah.
don't have to go out and seek it. We don't have to pay for it. We don't have to create anything elaborate.
Hmm.
It's literally all here.
Hmm. I also am getting this sense of just almost like a self fulfilling cycle that I know for myself, like if it's something you're not in the practice of doing, it can feel like foreign. We've been talking about how it could feel like alien or inaccessible.
Mhm.
But I think like what is really neat is that those experiences, they all have like an almost instant um, sensory positive reward, right? So it's like you really take that time with that lotion and you're like, ooh, this is really nice.
Yeah.
You don't Over time you're not going to have to like force yourself. This sounds so silly, like forcing yourself to experience pleasure, but like I know that there are people out there listening who feel that way,
No.
right? It's like I don't have time for this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so but I like this idea that like it can be its own reward
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
a way that will hopefully lead to more and more of us being able to prioritize it over time, because I really do think it is so important. Yeah, for everyone, business owners, regular people, moms, dads,
Oh my
anyone.
God.
I think it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, like to me, it comes back to like, how do I feel good? And I'd like to think
Hmm.
that everyone at some point in their day is trying to point themselves in that direction.
Yeah.
Whether it's, certain conversations at work, or, you gravitate towards, I don't know, a special park when you're having your lunch, or there's a TV
Hmm.
show that you love that makes you laugh. Like, I think we're all kind of just trying to move in that direction. So it's being a little bit more aware and intentional about it.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And like reclaiming an identity around it, I think too, of recognizing that it doesn't have to be for other people, it can be for
Mm.
ourselves. There's a store in Kingston called The Lake. I don't know if you know them, but they're very cool. They sell sort of all kinds of like mindful and pleasure tools, sex toys, like non-alcoholic drinks, and like they're just all about pleasure. But they have this hat you can get that just says "pleasure seeker" on it.
I love that.
Um,
I love that.
yeah, and I think it's just it's like again we've kind of been talking about it's like a little bit radical, like it's a
Yeah.
little bit like
Hmm.
like wow I'm claiming this identity as pleasure seeker, but I think once we do that and we say like I am somebody who wants these kinds of tangible daily pleasures, I think you're right. We're experiencing how powerful it can really be and how good we can feel, and the better we feel, the more effective we can be at like our work, our families, our relationships. Like the better we feel, the better everything is. So I think it's cool to think about claiming it as an identity if it
Yeah.
hasn't felt accessible before.
Yeah. I love that. And I also like the idea of it being integrated in such a way that it's not one or the other. It's not like I'm
Hmm.
productive or I'm uh, in pleasure,
Absolutely.
or, I'm a mom or I'm a pleasure seeker. Like, I think for me, not the challenge, but the invitation is like, how do I just keep integrating this into every aspect of my life? And some areas are harder and easier than others. Like, I would say candidly, finding the pleasure in motherhood has been challenging because I feel like in motherhood, I'm
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of very interestingly masculine role where I'm constantly like telling someone, do this, do that, follow this, like
Right.
also pushing past my own limits, long hours. Like, I'm like, where's
Yeah.
the pleasure in this? Um, and so, um, yeah, and like finding it, but it has to be my priority because I don't want it to feel that way. I do want it to feel
Yeah.
enjoyable and pleasurable um, more often than it does. So, yeah,
Yeah.
bringing it into the everyday, into all
I
different
think
areas
it's
of our lives.
Yes, and I think that's such a powerful concept. You actually just shared this sort of right before we started talking, but I saw you posted. I'm going to just read it so I don't get it wrong.
Yeah,
But you said how you get something done is just as important as getting it done,
yeah,
and how that's sort of a central premise. So, can you just speak briefly to like how that shows up in your business specifically? Because obviously, you have to answer emails, you have to, go on long shoot days. Like, how do you kind of bring this into the way that you run your business specifically?
yeah. So I'd say this is 100% a practice for me. Um,
Hmm.
so nothing like perfect is happening over here in terms of being
That's okay.
comfortable in business, but I would say it's taking the things that make me feel good and bringing them into the everyday. So like I start my day with dance breaks. I dress in a way that makes me feel good and more or less lights me up. That feels comfortable but also beautiful. I work in an environment like I've created my home in a way that feels beautiful so that it's like an oasis here. I could spend
Hmm.
hours here and feel like, it just feels like serene and comfortable. Um, I do take more breaks. I use a lot of tools to work through my emotions, which I think is huge.
Mm,
I think if I wasn't processing and digesting and expressing and embodying all of the emotions that I feel in one day, to me, that would be a block to pleasure. So, like opening the channel for these things to flow, having sisterhood
mm,
and support is also huge. Um, Being able to be myself and open and vulnerable, especially when things aren't going the way that I think they should be going. Again, I feel that that's like opening the door for more pleasure.
yeah.
Um, yeah, those are some of the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Hmm.
But like
Hmm.
a really simple one is like I take breaks and I dance like throughout the day. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's one of the joys of being at home, like working from home.
Hmm.
But it's just like a little reset that helps.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Ooh, what
Yeah.
I
I
eat
think
is also really important. Like I cook a
yeah.
breakfast every day.
Mm,
I cook dinner at night because I love food. Um, yeah, I feel like it's part of who I am. So now it's hard to like
yeah.
tease it out. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's pleasure first. I mean, it's like it's not different when it comes to your business. That's what I'm hearing. It's like
Yeah.
you have tried, and obviously, of course, it's an ongoing practice and learning, but you've tried to apply all of the things that you believe about pleasure first dressing and pleasure first living is now very obviously integrated with how you run your business. Like, I'm going to have a breakfast. I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to ask for help when I need it
Yeah.
from the people in my community, and so it's just this really beautiful. Sonia always says that our businesses are like a mirror,
Yeah.
um, and so it shows us the places that we're maybe not implementing certain things. But I also think the reverse is true. It also shows you where you are implementing things. So like if you have this pleasure first approach to your entire life, it's also obviously going to show up in the way that you run your business. And I just think it's just so inspiring.
Can I add something too? As you were talking, I was thinking, I think another big one is like getting closer and closer to who I am, and like
Mm,
really just being in that, like sitting with it and allowing that to come through my work. Even as I'm saying it, I'm like, ooh, goosebumps. I feel like this is it. Like
mm,
it's 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 like not just being in alignment but and being authentic, but like just allowing myself to be seen. And I think that's
mm,
ultimately what my work has been about, which is like my own journey of like being visible and allowing myself to be seen like exactly as I'm meant to be seen. I think a lot of pleasure comes from this process of like coming out of the closet or like no longer
mhm,
hiding and like feeling bigger, bolder, more of myself. Um, that's also felt really, really pleasurable in a scary, uncomfortable kind of way. But like, whoa,
mm,
yeah,
It's like a deeper level of pleasure that goes beyond just like the senses. It's now the pleasure of almost like integration, like
yeah,
all of the pieces of yourself. Maybe in past careers, there were parts of you that only showed up in certain contexts,
yeah,
like with your family or with your friends. And I think what you're speaking to is the pleasure of being known in like all facets of your life as the person that you are, who wears these beautiful, colorful things and dances and sings and like, makes a breakfast. Like it can be scary. And as we've been speaking throughout this conversation, it's like a little bit vulnerable in some ways to position yourself as somebody who like there's almost like that this is my own projection of like who does she think she is? Like that's how I would think of it for
totally.
myself. Like what she gets to, make a breakfast every morning. We should all, guys, we should all be able to make breakfast every morning. I hate to break it to you, but that is not that transgressive actually. But yeah, I think it's just a beautiful thing what you're speaking to, like almost these deeper layers of pleasure, like not just how we feel in our bodies, but also now how we feel spiritually, like
Yeah.
to be known, to be seen, to be accepted or held. There's just such a deep pleasure in those things as well. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
And I think that can happen for anybody on different levels, like even just to be seen as you're meant to be seen by your family or your
Yeah,
community, or like the bubble can grow bigger and bigger on a wider stage. Um,
yeah.
and I think it's something you were saying made me think of, the idea of dimming our light. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of us are used to just turning down the volume a little bit because we don't want to be too
Mm-hmm.
much or take up too much space, or like who does she think she is?
Yeah.
So part of my pleasure practice, I think, as well, is about like just like allowing the shine to be as shiny and bright as it's supposed to be. And honestly, for me, there's no greater joy than when I see a woman who started in a place that might be a little stuck and settling and like,
Yeah.
light turned down, and then
Yeah.
seeing her come out not come out the other side, but
Yeah.
really feel
Step more.
"Hey, like there's more here. In fact, there's a whole lot more, and I'm just gonna like let this out of the box and be unapologetic about it, and then also to
Mm-hmm.
find the fun in it. Like this
Mm-hmm.
whole experience should be fun. Like
Yeah. Oh, fun is fun. It's making me think too of like the authenticity piece being so important in business as well, right? Like there is that pleasure in being just yourself
yeah,
rather than trying to be like the thing that you think
people
a
want.
stylist is supposed to be or a business coach is supposed to be. Like I recorded a podcast episode the other week and I found I had so much fun recording it. I just felt like myself. I
Yeah.
wasn't censoring myself. I wasn't like overthinking it the way that sometimes we can.
Yeah.
And it was like a pleasurable experience. But then it was also like I got a lot of great feedback because I think people are like, whoa, like that's real. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you showed up as yourself. And so that's making me think of that too,
Yeah.
of the standards we hold ourselves to and how freeing and pleasurable and fun it can be to kind of let some of that go and just be like, this is who I am and I'm going to be, you know, myself and I'm not going to be this stereotypical business coach per se.
Yeah. 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 Breaking out of the box. Or maybe not breaking
Yeah.
out of the box, but just really feeling like you're doing it your way.
Your own way.
Yeah. Your
Mm-hmm.
way. Yeah.
Oh, so good. What a juicy, just such a juicy conversation. I didn't fully know which direction it was going to go in, but I think it went into such a deeper place than I even expected. And I just really am so grateful for this conversation. But I do want to move now to our relaxed responses. That is what I call them because I don't want to call it rapid fire because
Oh,
why,
yes.
why do we want to call it that? We don't.
I love it.
So these are just questions that you can take your time with, but
Ooh,
it's really like your first
I love
reaction.
it.
We just want to get to know you a bit more. Yeah.
Okay.
Be in repose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like,
Okay. All right. So the first one is, how do you take your tea or your coffee?
oh, okay. So I don't really drink coffee.
Okay.
If I do, I'll make a mochaccino. And I just made one
Oh,
today actually. So it'll be decaf because I can't do caffeine.
yeah.
I've got like a milk frother, so I froth
Oh,
the milk. Ooh, this is all very pleasurable.
yeah.
I just bought. I'm gonna get excited about this. I just bought this cinnamon. It's this organic cinnamon,
Ooh.
and it tastes like the flavor. They even say that a lot of the cinnamon we buy in the stores isn't actually cinnamon. It's cassia. It's like a sister
Oh,
plant. And so this is true cinnamon, and it just has this really beautiful flavor that reminds me of being in the tropics. And so I add that. I add cocoa powder. I add hazelnut syrup, and then that's my drink. And I'll use like either oat milk or today I did it with half and half cream, and it was very decadent.
oh,
Yeah.
that sounds amazing. Oh,
And then if I drink
great
tea,
answer.
because I love this question, I'll just drink it
Yeah.
black. And I don't drink black tea with
Okay.
chai, like a rooibos chai. That's my favorite.
Yeah. Ooh, I feel like I just got to know you so much more. And I'm like, I have a milk frother. Where is it? I should go
Ah,
find
I can't,
it.
I can't have like a milky drink without the milk frother. I just love like the bubbles and the
Yeah.
frothiness. It's really
It's
good.
very pleasurable.
Very
On brand.
pleasurable.
On brand.
Yes. And let me just add to this because this is a great question. I will drink it in a beautiful cup. So thinking of
Mm,
not spending too much money on pleasure, I went to the thrift store and I found these great little um, like China teacups, and I love
hmm.
drinking my hot drinks in those because it
Oh,
feels good.
I love that. And I also love thrifting. So
Yes,
great
yes,
answer.
yeah. Treasure hunting.
Totally. Okay. Number two, and I'm very curious about this. What is the best book that you have read lately?
Ooh, lately. Oh, okay. Um, I always have more than one book on the go, so I'm trying to think. I would say it's Existential Kink by
Ooh, I've
Carolyn.
heard about this book.
Yeah, by Carolyn Elliott. I'd heard like I'd had a lot of people I knew who were reading it, and I'm sort of slowly. No, I have completed this book. Um, yeah, I love the premise, the idea that whatever we're experiencing, whether it's good or bad, is ultimately what we desire to experience. So it's adding some agency. It's a little hard to explain
Mm,
in a soundbite, but I found it fascinating.
cool. I'm gonna have to check it out because you're, I think, the second or third person who's recommended it of somebody who I like really, you know, respect their opinion. So,
And
yeah,
like
sounds good.
her idea, I mentioned this earlier, but it's ultimately like we can find there is pleasure in everything is one of her
Mm,
premises. And this idea that the kink part is she uses the example of someone who loves BDSM, they are able to find pleasure in what other people might consider a very painful practice. So
hmm.
there's pleasure behind all facets of our humanity. And it's once we understand that and realize like, oh, I might be experiencing this terrible thing in my life, but there's some part of my soul that wants to experience this. It kind of just changes the
Hmm.
way I look at what's happening in my life.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to check it out. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Okay, this one, I always love the answer to this question. So, where is your favorite place on earth, Joy?
Oh, okay. I love to travel, so this is a good one. Favorite place on earth? Hmm. So, I mean, I think traveling is one of my all like the favorite thing to do. That's probably where
Hmm.
I would put all of my money if I not all of my money, but a lot of money if I won the lottery would be on travel. It's really hard for me to pick one place because I can find something in everywhere I've been. Do I have to pick one?
Pick one that you like a lot then. You don't have to pick of
Well,
all time.
so the place I think I've been to the most in the world is Morocco. I think I've been there
Oh, cool.
5 times, and
Wow.
yeah, there's so much to love about it. I love the food. I love um, the people. I love the various cities I've been to, the different geography, the desert. I love the souks. So I'm someone who loves to go into a market and just explore.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, there's endless exploration in like a souk in Marrakesh. So I'll pick that.
Oh, that sounds amazing. That
Yeah.
sounds amazing. I would love to go to Morocco.
Yeah.
Um, okay, and then this one usually goes one of two ways. So the question is, what's something you'd like to get yourself as a gift?
Um,
And the caveat is that there are some people that as soon as they think of the thing that they want, they just go get it, which I kind of feel like might be you. Um, so if that's the case, what is something you got yourself as a gift recently? So you can take it in either direction.
oh, something I got myself as a gift recently, or something I want to get.
Yes, get yourself. Yeah.
Something I want to get myself. Well, I know one of the things I'd want to get myself, and I won't be getting it right away because it's super
Okay.
expensive. So that is a Cartier Panther ring.
Ooh.
I would love a vintage one. So
Ooh.
I've been into the Cartier store and actually did this thing where, you know, when you feel like, oh, I can't have this whole conversation, like I can't have this.
Yeah.
It's very expensive. I don't actually belong in these spaces. Like, you know, I don't shop
Mm,
at Cartier normally. And, you know, going in there, there's a security guard at the door. It's very
yeah.
um, chic and elevated. And so one day I kind of forced myself to go in and try on the rings that I want for the whole
Oh,
experience of just
cool.
like feeling that in my body. Um,
Yeah.
those rings are thousands. So I'm not going to be getting it tomorrow, but it's on my desire list. Like I have a list of things that I want to do, be, experience, and that ring is there.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's such a cool answer. And I love that you had that embodied like activity of it where you sort of went and touched it and saw it
Yeah.
and like felt it. Yeah. It's just
Tried
so
on
neat.
different
Oh,
ones. Yeah. And I brought my son as well because I wanted him to
oh,
be in
cool.
that experience of luxury and just like let that
Yeah.
feel normal rather than like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't go into that store. It's a bit like going up to the makeup counter for some people, like,
Yeah.
oh, this woman looks so done up. I just can't. I don't look like that. I don't belong. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah. What a cool activity.
Yeah.
Um, Joy, you're so cool. Thank you so much for being here and for this conversation. I really am so grateful. I feel like I got a lot out of it personally, and I know a lot of people
Yay.
listening will too. So yeah, tell us before you go how we can find you, what you're working on, what
Mhm.
you're excited about right now. Just how can we keep in touch with you?
Okay. So the best place to find me is on Instagram at Black Lady of Leisure or my website, which is blackladyofleisure.com. And in terms of what I'm excited about, I just launched this awesome program called the Peacock Club. And what I love about it is it's taking my philosophy around dressing, which is 100% pleasure first, inspired by the
Yeah.
peacock, which is this bird that really walks into a room and owns it and lights it up. and
Yeah.
sharing that with like a very small and intimate group of 10 women. So we get to go through this process together. And like I might have mentioned earlier, I really see the value in sisterhood, in
Hmm.
community, in feeling like I'm not alone in this. And then even more so, like watching other women turn on and light up and realizing like
Yeah.
there's permission for me to do the same. Like we can take each other higher.
Hmm.
So I'm really excited about this. I will be running it again. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll find out more when the next round will be.
Yeah, that sounds so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. So much there. Like, I think the community piece would make it so powerful as
Yeah.
well, right? Because you're going through the experience together. And I think sometimes one on one, I've experienced this in my own work. Like, you tell a client something, and they're kind of like, okay, but like, that's just one person. But if the group is like, you look amazing,
Yeah.
you have an easier time believing it almost. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that just sounds magical. Cool. Okay. Well, I will link to everything in the show notes. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again, Joy. This was really special.
Oh, this is awesome. I loved speaking with you.
Thanks so much for listening to Slowpreneur. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend or reach out and let me know at hello@stephaniepellet.com. I would love to hear from you. As always, you can find show notes for this and all episodes at stephaniepellet.com/slowpreneur. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.